Welcome, everyone, to Office Hours. I don't know what episode number this is. We've done probably somewhere around 20, I think. In any event, today I'm talking to school choice evangelist Corey DeAngelis. That rhymes, kind of. We're going to be talking about school choice, a very fraught topic with emotions on both sides. We're going to get into some of that, talk specifically about some of the benefits of school choice, what we can expect from an ESA program where it implemented in the state of Tennessee, that kind of thing. So I'm going to bring up my guest, Corey DeAngelis, right now. Corey, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You were supposed to be in Nashville today.
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought about it, but I figured I would do that event from Zoom. I actually did another video thing, but I actually changed my in-person event. I'll be there February 6th or 7th. I'll have to look, double check, but I'll be there pretty soon.
Cool. Yeah. Because I know there was the Fox 17 panel tonight, and I imagine, I'm snowed in right now. Everyone in town is. Restaurants are closed. Everything's closed, so we're all hiding out in our respective houses mostly.
Yeah, the weather has been a total disaster, so we've been doing a lot of remote stuff lately.
Yeah. Well, for those unfamiliar with your work, can you tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, and I think what's a relevant part of that is your experience in the schooling system and what made you gravitate towards school choice as your passionate expression. So.
I mean, it's the most obvious policy solution we have to a lot of the problems in our country today. And it's a pretty simple concept. The money that's meant for educating the child should follow them to wherever they're getting an adequate education. That could be the public school. If you like your public school, you can keep your public school for real this time, and like with your doctor. But if not, with school choice, you can take that funding to spend it at a private school for tuition and fees, a charter school, or a home-based education option. So the logic is just airtight. I mean, if you look at a lot of the opponents of school choice, they support the same concept or the same logic behind the proposal when it comes to higher education. If you think about Pell Grants for college, you can take Pell Grant taxpayer funding to public universities if you want, but you could also take those scholarships to private universities. We do the same thing with pre-K programs that the Democrats often support, actually, and you can take that funding to any approved private provider of pre-K, even religious providers if you want to. If you think about the federal Head Start program, for example, that can be the money follows the student. If you think about food stamps, which the left supports, you can take that funding, those taxpayer dollars, to any private grocery provider. So their main argument is, oh, these are public funds and they must be used at public schools. Well, first of all, there's no such thing as public funds. They're taxpayer dollars. And the argument just falls apart when you look at the logical inconsistency where they support funding people directly for everything else, but not K through 12 education. Why would that be? Well, it's because of a difference in power dynamics. Choice is the norm for higher ed and pre-K and everything else, but choice threatens an entrenched special interest, the teachers unions, namely, and the superintendents, who fight against any change to the status quo because they want to keep their gravy train going. They want your education dollars to go to their schools. The better way for them to do that is to just do a better job to compete. And we do see when school choice is implemented, the public schools up their game in response to competition. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. I got into this really as a researcher at the University of Arkansas. My first study on the topic during my PhD linked the Milwaukee voucher program or scholarship program out there that started in 1990 to a long-term outcome that's really important to a lot of people, which is whether you get involved in the criminal justice system. And we found large effects suggesting that school choice could reduce crime. I've done 2 of these studies. 6 of them exist on this topic, all of them peer-reviewed. They all find school choice reduces crime, which is another side benefit of just empowering parents with more choices. Obviously, if you get to choose an education that works for you, you're going to choose based on academics, but you're also going to choose based on the safety of the school, the culture at the school, whether it's aligned with your values. And parents have the best information when it comes to making decisions for their own kids. Kids don't belong to the government. Parents should be in charge.
Well, what is the number one reason for people choosing to exercise their choice? I mean, we've got charter schools in Nashville, so I guess we can just constrain this to people that are choosing to exit the public school that they're districted for through whatever mechanism, what do you understand as the number one reason for people sending their children to another school?
Well, it depends on the family. Some people will want a better academic environment, but if you look at standardized test scores and you look at other studies from places like Florida that have over 100,000 students using their private school choice program, they actually parents ranked standardized testing as the last priority out of about a dozen different priorities. They listed safety as the number one issue, and another top issue was having a religious instruction if you want that, or having a curriculum that aligns with your values. So I think a lot of the push behind school choice over the past few years, at least since the school closures started in 2020, and the unions fought to keep the schools closed as long as possible. Not as big of a problem in Tennessee as in places like Chicago, where the unions were tweeting that it was racist and sexist to open schools. They actually deleted that tweet. Had a board member vacationing in Puerto Rico, and at the same time saying that it was too dangerous to go to work, but they were vacationing halfway across the world because
that's convenient.
But if they were so afraid of COVID, why were they leaving their house and going halfway across the world? But the reason that we've seen so much success, I think, lately is that it's become more of a GOP litmus test issue because families got to see what was happening in the classroom. A lot of parents who thought their kids were in good public schools based on test scores started to see another dimension of school quality that's arguably more important, which is whether the school's curriculum aligns with their values. Families don't want to send their kids where they feel like they're being indoctrinated. They don't want to send their kids to institutions that have leftist ideals. So instead, parents pushed back at the school board meetings. In some cases, those parents were labeled as domestic terrorists from the Biden administration, coordinating with the National School Boards Association, who sent a letter to the Department of Justice to imply that some parents should be investigated for domestic terrorism.
Yeah,
and that did not work for them. That blew up in their face. That was meant to bully and silence parents into submission who didn't like CRT, for example. Those parents they became an organized interest group in their own and started fighting even more for their kids. And some states started to ban CRT. But then we started to see that was a form of whack-a-mole, that this top-down solution didn't really work when you look at the implementation. We actually have video from Tennessee and other red states that banned CRT, where Accuracy in Media did some undercover journalism. They went to public schools and asked the employees, well, if your state, banned CRT, or if it already did, what are you going to do about it? And the public school employees, in a lot of cases, were saying they're just going to skirt the law. They're going to call it something else. They'll call it social emotional learning or student mental health. And it really just goes to show you that a lot of these laws are unenforceable in some cases. And the better solutions from the bottom up, let parents choose. If you get a whiff that something is not right going on in your school, you shouldn't have to prove it at the state level. I mean, just think about how difficult that would be in the first place. And if it's not in the curriculum explicitly, on which is posted online in some states, the teacher still may teach through a CRT lens, even if CRT isn't in the curriculum explicitly. Right. The better solution is to say, look, parents know best. They have this information. And if they want to go to a private school that's aligned with their values, they should have that choice. And no one should be able to tell them why they should be allowed or not allowed to make that choice.
When do you think public schools went wrong? Where does this all start? And what's the genesis of the school choice movement? It's gained significant momentum in the past, I don't know, it seems to me past couple of years especially, it's really ramped up. So what kind of, can you give us some sense of what led to this moment? Because Tennessee's got an ESA law that's on the table. Other states across the country, we'll kind of get into some of that briefly next. But kind of help us understand what's kind of building behind this.
We should really thank Randy Weingarten and the teachers unions for overplaying their hand and awakening a sleeping giant, which happens to be parents who want more of a say in their kids' education. I mean, a lot of families thought that their kids were doing okay. I mean, you'd ask how people thought the public school system was doing, and things seemed fine until recently. The latest Gallup polling found an all-time low in support or an amount of confidence in the public school system, with I want to say it was only about 8 or 9% of Republicans expressing confidence in the public school system.
Sounds about right.
At large. So, I mean, the support has gone down. But at the end of the day, even if a lot of people like their public schools, that's not an argument against choice. That's just an argument that, well, things, if nothing's going to change, if everybody loves their public school so much, you should have nothing to worry about. I mean, the teachers unions groups will say, oh, this is going to defund the public schools and it's going to decimate the system as we know it. But then in the next breath, they'll say everybody loves their public schools. And you know what? We already have school choice in Tennessee. Well, if that's the case, why would giving families true opportunities by having the money follow the child, why would that hurt the public schools in any way? You're so confident in what you're providing, you should have nothing to worry about. But I really think where the teachers unions went wrong was with the school closures. It changed the argument from being solely about test scores and failing government schools to something that impacted all families, which is the curriculum not being aligned with their values. That, look, you can be in an A-rated school and it still not be the right fit for your kid. And so you've had a different type of coalition pushing for school choice than we've ever seen before. And we've had 10 states go universal on school choice. And that means every single family in those 10 states is now eligible, regardless of income, regardless of background, regardless of zip code. The first states were West Virginia and Arizona. The most recent state was North Carolina last year, which is actually pretty funny because all these states have been controlled by Republican legislatures. But in North Carolina, they had a Democrat governor, Roy Cooper, who's a hypocrite on school choice, sent his own kid to private school and then pulls the ladder up from behind himself and fights against school choice for others. He even declared a state of emergency over school choice last year. Talk about an abuse of emergency powers. It was basically him throwing a temper tantrum because all the Republicans signed on to the bill, which is 60% of each chamber in North Carolina, meaning he wouldn't be able to veto the bill without an override. And so if North Carolina can do it with all Republicans, if Arizona can do it with every single Republican, they have 1-seat GOP majorities in Arizona. Tennessee should be able to get this done pretty dang easy. The Republicans, lawmakers have a very easy choice coming up this session. You either side with the Democrats and the Tennessee 3 or parents, your own party platform, and Governor Bill Lee. I'm pretty optimistic that Tennessee is going to get this across the finish line, especially with the backing of the governor, House and Senate leadership backing the proposal as well. And then if you just go to the voters, I mean, a supermajority of voters in Tennessee support the concept of school choice. The latest polling I saw was actually from Beacon Center, 68% of support for the governor's proposal, with 85% support among Republican voters. Morning Consult has also done some polling on this, finding that 68% of Tennessee voters, again, support ESAs, education savings accounts, and 75% of Tennessee parents with school-age children support education savings accounts. It's a popular issue. It's a GOP litmus test issue at this point. I mean, in the Republican primaries in 2022, you had 10 Republicans running in the primaries in Tennessee in the House that were endorsed or funded by the teachers union. 9 of them lost. It was basically the political kiss of death to get the teachers union endorsement in states like Tennessee now. And I think that's also why things are changing, because families, they care about school choice. They want more of an opportunity. They're making it a voting issue, and that's translating to political victories for politicians who often respond to power dynamics, in addition, hopefully, to logic as well. And in the 2022 midterms nationwide, there wasn't a red wave like a lot of people were anticipating. There wasn't a blue wave, obviously, but there was a school choice wave. 76% of the candidates supported by my organization, the American Federation for Children, won their races in 2022. And we didn't just play in the easy ones. We targeted 69 incumbents in state legislatures and took out 40 of them, which is the hardest thing to do in politics.
The biggest one was Youngkin in Virginia.
Yeah, that was a good one.
It was basically, it was on the back of that report about, public school failures in Loudoun County.
Right. And he was going against a former governor, Terry McAuliffe. Right. He was basically going against an incumbent in a blue state, where the biggest blunder in campaign history, in my opinion, when it comes to education, was when Terry McAuliffe at the final debate said, "I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach." Youngkin won, a Republican, with education voters by 6 points. Republicans usually don't. So he laid out a blueprint for success for Republicans, which is to embrace parental rights in education, put the Democrats on defense for thinking that kids belong to the government, expose them for the socialists they are, and you can make some campaign backfires happen just by talking about the issues if Terry McAuliffe and others aren't careful, and that's exactly what happened. And hopefully Republicans learn to become the parents' party in other states too. Tennessee looks like it's gonna happen. Tennessee already has ESAs for certain counties,
right?
Which is the gold standard of school choice funding, having the funding follow the student. But it's time to go all in, go to every single county, and the governor's proposal does just that. I'm pretty excited about it.
So there's basically, from what I've identified, there are kind of three camps that oppose. Three separate groups that oppose ESA programs specifically, and that is Democrats, who are very clearly aligned with the teachers union and philosophically, or in my opinion, religiously attached to public schools. They view them as like these temples of something. And then you have Republicans in rural areas who are opposed to it because a lot of the jobs in the county, in a small county, come from the public school. And then you have a group on the right that views this as a way for like an expansion of state control over the education process. So I kind of want to take each one of those one by one.
I'll hit all of them.
Democrats opposed to it because they're concerned that this is going to lead to the destruction of public schools. You've kind of hinted at that. You've talked about this as a criticism, but. Maybe the response to them is fairly straightforward to me. The public schools are having a hard time. They want more money. Why is giving public schools more money not the solution?
Tennessee's already tried that. Since 1970, Tennessee has increased per student education funding after adjusting for inflation by 180%. So it's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. The money doesn't make its way into the classroom. It goes toward administrative bloat and staffing surges because the government school system, by and large, is a one-size-fits-all monopoly that has no incentive to spend additional dollars wisely. The way that you inject competition into that system is by allowing the families to choose, allow the consumers to choose the provider that works best for them. That could be the public school. And a lot of parents still do like their public schools, and they should be able to have that opportunity. That option is on the table with school choice. But if not, families should be able to go somewhere else. And we have so much evidence. The defenders of the status quo, who are in universities, which are mostly Marxist institutions at this point, they're institutions of higher indoctrination, I would like to call them. But they don't even argue about this evidence anymore. It's the clearest strand of evidence. There's 29 studies on this topic. 26 of the 29 studies find positive effects of private school choice competition on the outcomes in the public schools. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's a win-win solution. The problem is the Democratic Party is owned by the teachers unions. You look at Randy Weingarten's union, the American Federation of Teachers. 99.97% of her campaign contributions in 2022 went to Democrats. It's a complex money laundering scheme, and it needs to stop, and more people need to realize what's happening. The money goes to the government schools, goes to the unions, that union funding goes to the Democratic Party, which funnels more money into the government school system. Doesn't go into the classroom, but it goes towards more union dues, which makes it way back to Randy Weingarten, who makes over $500,000 a year. So the unions aren't even good for teachers. I mean, they advocate for policies that protect the worst and make them look bad on a national level. They have become an extremely leftist organization that doesn't even have much to do with education anymore. It's more about social justice activism than anything. And you can just look at Randy Weingarten's Twitter feed to figure that out. I mean, she's just attacking Republicans every single day.
Yeah.
And she also limits she closes the replies on her tweets like she closed the schools by lobbying the CDC. Yeah, every single one.
Classic.
I mean, so at the end, and then also if you look at proposals like the one in Tennessee, the government schools spend about $12,000 per student per year. If you look at the Census Bureau data from 2021, it's probably higher now, but that's the latest that I've seen. Average private school tuition this year is less than that. It's actually about $11,300 per student per year at private schools. Some are higher, obviously, some are lower. But when you look at the proposals floating around legislatures, it's typically the state portion of funding that follows the students, about $7,000 or $8,000 per student. And so on a per student basis, the public schools actually can financially benefit. If you're only taking $7,000 in a scholarship to go to a private school voluntarily, if you want to do that, if you don't want to stay in the public school, the public schools get to keep thousands of dollars for students who are no longer there. They end up with more money per student left behind. So, I mean, just imagine if you stopped shopping at Walmart, you wanted to go to Trader Joe's. If Walmart got to keep half of your grocery funding each week, that would be a good deal for them. I'd argue this is similarly a good deal for the public schools, that they get to keep any money at all for students who are no longer in the schools.
That kind of transitions well to the next camp of opponents to this that I think are more reluctant and I think generally support the idea of school choice and are kind of, criticize public schools for the same reasons that you were for the indoctrination factor. But there are Republicans in rural areas who are concerned that this will take jobs away from the public schools. And you just mentioned how, there's thousands of dollars left behind per student, so that spending per student, if the population of the school goes down, changes. I think, I'm not as the funding formula for public schools in Tennessee is based on per student. The recent TISA funding formula is based on per student, so I'm not sure exactly how that works out. But I can't erase this image of a public school that once had 800 students, and it's a big facility with lockers and classrooms and a gym and everything. And if it's a bad school, people are going to leave it, and then you have this giant facility that's all of a sudden kind of empty and cavern-like. And I feel like that image maybe is what worries rural Republicans who agree with the idea of school choice in principle, but see it as a threat to some of their base who work for the public schools. So how would you speak to those people?
I mean, the rural argument is the dumbest argument I've heard against school choice in a very long time. Because look, when you listen to legislators, I think it's more of an excuse for fake Republicans to vote against their party platform and against parents, and to side with the people the unions that were already backing them. But look, the logical argument is it just doesn't make it's not logical at all. I mean, they'll come to you and they'll say, hey man, I can't support this because on the one hand, the public school is the only option. This doesn't benefit my constituents because we only have, this one public school. We don't really have private schools in my area. We're not going to benefit from this. So, I shouldn't really support this. But in the next breath, with a straight face, they'll look you in the eyes and they'll try to say that, well, if we have choice, this is going to destroy my fantastic rural public school. That's the only option. Wait, hold on. Which one is it? If it's the only option and schools are funded based on the amount of students there, if no one's going to leave, you're not going to lose any money in the rural district. You should be the last person arguing that this is going to defund your rural public school. If you think it's doing a great job, if you think it's actually fantastic, and maybe a lot of people do. And if that's the case, no one's going to leave. And if no one leaves because there aren't any exit options, well, then again, you should be the last person making the argument against school choice on the basis of it supposedly defunding your public school. I mentioned earlier, it's not the full amount of funding per student. So that's another thing. And if you're going to fear monger about school choice hurting rural communities, the burden of proof should be on you to show that evidence. And again, as I mentioned, 26 to 29 studies in states with rural areas and non-rural areas as well find that school choice leads to better outcomes in the public schools, not worse. So if you're fear mongering, burden of proof should be on you. And in fact, if you look today, the 9 most rural states in the country, including West Virginia, that was the first state to pass a universal program. West Virginia is much more rural, according to the Census Bureau, than Tennessee. Well, the 9 most rural states in the country already have some form of private school choice already. It's been fine for them, including Maine and Vermont, some of the most rural states in the country. And they're not Republican states right now, but they have the oldest voucher programs in the country, actually. They started in the late 1800s, called town tuitioning programs. And actually, they started these programs in Maine and Vermont because they were so rural. They figured out in some places, they were so rural in some districts, they didn't even have access to public schools in those places. So the state actually determined that in order to fix their problem, they'd give a voucher to the families or scholarship to go to another public school nearby or a private religious or non-religious school. They figured out over 100 years ago in states like Maine and Vermont that not having a lot of choices, not having a lot of opportunities is an argument to expand choice, not to restrict it. And if you look at polling, students in rural families in rural area tend to be more supportive of school choice than in non-rural areas. So if you're actually listening to the voters, you should be more likely to vote for it, not less likely. And supply isn't fixed. Back to the argument that, well, we don't have a lot of private options. Well, in Florida, data from Step Up for Students that I wrote about at the Wall Street Journal in a piece called "The Little Red Schoolhouse Could Do with a Little Competition." It talked about this rural argument that's perpetrated by the teachers unions in red states. They know that they can't block it with lefty arguments. So they try to come up with conservative arguments against school choice in red states. And we've heard Randy Weingarten repeating this stuff from the so-called right against school choice in redder states. It's just a convenient excuse for fake Republicans to vote against their own party platform. But at the end of the day, it's already in rural. Oh, supply's not fixed is what I was getting at in this Wall Street Journal article. Florida released data showing that as they've expanded school choice over the past couple of decades, the number of private education providers in the most rural counties in Florida has doubled. Huh. So you give money to the parents, let them choose. Well, if you build it, they will come. When families have choice now the suppliers are going to enter the market. It's basic econ 101. And with education savings accounts, which is the proposal by Governor Bill Lee, instead of just the voucher where you have to use it at a brick and mortar private school, that has a lot more fixed costs. It's more likely to take a longer time to build a big private school. But if you have ESAs, you can have micro schools start up. And this actually happened in Arizona. Arizona has a big flourishing micro school market, which is basically they're very small schools. In some cases, it's kind of like a homeschool co-op where you get 5 to 10 children together in a household. Kind of think of the one-room schoolhouse kind of idea. And you don't have to build another huge brick and mortar school to enter the market. And this is so popular in Arizona that the NEA, the nation's largest labor union and teachers union, they put out an opposition research sheet on Prenda micro schools. The Wall Street Journal editorial board actually wrote about it in a piece called "The Teachers Union's Tiny Little Enemy," because they're so afraid of this new way of schooling that actually it's just a reimagining the one-room schoolhouse, where it's more likely a doable thing in a rural area. And then you can also, if virtual classes could work in rural areas too. But at the end of the day, the worst case scenario is nothing changes. If no one enters the market in your rural area and the public school is the only option, expanding school choice statewide, it's not going to hurt you. Even if you want to make the argument it doesn't give you a lot of additional choices, which it probably will in the future, the worst case scenario is you're no worse off.
You bringing up micro schools is a good window for us to look at the next criticism that I frequently hear, which is that allowing state dollars to come into our private schools or into our home schools invites the chance for states to expand their regulatory capacity in the state school system and get teeth into private schools and allow them to, eventually the mechanism would be there if they tie ESA dollars to, if they're giving ESA dollars to a private school, they could eventually enforce some sort of curriculum or some other standards that the schools have to adopt in order to continue accepting ESA dollars. And like the analogy for that would be, you get people high on the supply, and then you kind of change the requirements to retain access to that supply. What would you say to critics who come at it from that angle?
Yeah, I'll first say it's not all homeschoolers that make this argument. In Texas, where I live, for example, they have the Texas Homeschool Coalition. They sign on to the ESA bill all the time, and they endorse pro school choice candidates in the legislature. there's a small fringe group that makes this argument that's their whole bread and butter. They're the homeschool group that makes the argument against school choice. That's all they do. So it's not everybody in the homeschool population that makes this argument, but at the end of the day, it is it's the textbook definition of making perfect the enemy of the good. We already have 9 out of 10 kids being indoctrinated in government schools to like big government policy today. If you have more people going through that system, they're going to be more likely to like big government and to see it as the answer to all their policy problems in society going forward. When they graduate, they're going to be able to vote, and they might vote to regulate private and home education out of existence with the status quo. So not doing anything is a problem in itself because, look, you have so millions of kids across the country stuck in schools where they're learning to like socialism. That's a problem. And so one of my main critiques of this argument is that the government can already regulate private and home education, and they do in socialist states like New York. In New York, they have the worst homeschooling law in the books, according to the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. They don't have any private school choice programs. You look at Rhode Island and Massachusetts, they are also listed as some of the worst states for homeschooling. No private school choice programs. You look at Iowa, Oklahoma, they have universal school choice, and they have the best homeschooling laws on the books. You look at Ohio, they just passed universal school choice last year, and they at the same time deregulated homeschooling. And so this is a separate issue from school choice. And I'd say it's related in one way, in that school choice can reduce the likelihood of regulation happening in at least 3 ways. One, you have fewer kids involved in the government-run school system, so you have an escape valve where kids can go to schools that align with their values. And then, so if you have fewer kids being indoctrinated like big government policy, that'll be a good thing in the long run. Secondly, politics is all about coalition building, organized interests pushing for what they want in front of policymakers. And well, if you have more people benefiting from private and home education through school choice initiatives, you build a bigger coalition to fight back against that government overreach in the future. The way that you win against authoritarians is by banding together. What better way to do that than to allow more families to experience private and home education? And 3, if more people are benefiting from private and home education through school choice, you make the concept more mainstream. If the concept is more mainstream, the rest of society should be less likely to view it as some icky thing that only a few people are doing. So that the calls for regulation should be less fierce going forward, and they'll be less likely to call for the regulation in the first place. Another response is that not all school choice bills are created equal. And in model legislation from my group and Institute for Justice as well, we call for explicit anti-regulation text in the bill, such as, you can't require the private school to change their creed, curriculum, admissions processes, and so on, which is really important. And then you could also just write into the bill that the regulation won't change at all from the current system, where, if you have a private school that starts in Tennessee, you could just require that nothing changes, that you can't put any additional government controls on the private school. So instead of making this argument and saying, I'm not going to support school choice because it might regulate the private schools, instead of just fighting against all school choice together based on that argument, you should be fighting for an amendment. If that text isn't in the bill, you can say, well, I'd rather see have anti-regulation language in the bill. But look, we shouldn't miss the forest for the trees. I mean, this is really just nitpicking. And if you go ask legislators why they're going to vote yes or no on school choice, the ones who vote no, they're making the Democrat arguments. They aren't making this fear-mongering argument about school choice. It's not really all that influential in the state capitol. But at the end of the day, if you are making this argument, just know you're on the side of Randy Weingarten and the teachers unions. She has tweeted out this argument. She tweeted out that, it's going to control the price. Is she saying that because she's some anti-government libertarian? No, she's a big government socialist, and she wants to keep her gravy train going. She wants to continue to get your kids' education dollars by trapping them in her failing government-run schools. But the thing is, look, if you're on Randy Weingarten's side, you're not on my side. You're probably on the wrong side.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time spent with us. Best of luck. Where people can find you on Twitter. at DeAngelis Corey. Where else can they find you? You're doing this thing tonight on Fox 17. If you're in Nashville, you can tune into Fox 17 at I think 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, and catch Corey there with the great Heidi Campbell. I can't wait to see how that goes down. I mean, speaking of someone that has got awful arguments against this, Heidi Campbell.
Well, she went to private school. She sent her kids to private school. She says she supports the public school system so much that she won't send her own kids there. I mean, it seems like there's a disconnect. And at the end of the day, I don't blame anybody for sending their own kids to private school. But the thing is, everybody should have that opportunity, and you shouldn't pull up the ladder from behind yourself and then fight against opportunities for others. I mean, it's just total hypocrisy. And again, it's because the teachers unions own the Democratic Party. There's no logical argument against school choice. It's all about power and the nonstop money laundering scheme we call the teachers unions. But Look, you can follow me on X or Twitter at DeAngelis Corey. I also have a new book coming out. It's available for pre-order. It's The Parent Revolution: Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. It's available at basically everywhere, but you can Google it, The Parent Revolution.
Great. All right, Corey, thanks so much. I'm going to sign us off. We'll see you around.
Cool. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, that was Corey DeAngelis. One thing I've been just frankly having not a ton of experience with debates around school choice and this kind of thing until the past couple of years is how much emotion this issue brings out in people. It's kind of granted, I don't have kids, so that may explain a good part of it, but it is shocking to me how passionate people get about this. And I mean, if you go to any of the education committee hearings or you go to the state legislature, a lot of the signs you'll see are, I can't remember the text on the signs, but they're about this issue and about funding public schools and this and that. And the only thing that I've been able to come up with to explain why people are so passionately attached to their public schools is because, in the lack of a religious context for a lot of their beliefs, they cleave to public schools to supply this source of meaning, and it kind of gets into this whole, this ideology of accomplishing and being competent within the school, and that's where people derive meaning. And I think if anything we've seen over the past at least 3 years since COVID stuff is how hollow what is offered by this worldview, how hollow it is, and how shallow and unfulfilling it ultimately is for people that abide by it. So anyway, all that is to say, if you guys are new to this show, we're based out of Nashville. We send out daily newsletters. If you want to get on the list, I point over here. Sign up at our website, pamphleteer.co, and we talk about Nashville and Middle Tennessee politics. We talk about state politics. We're obviously talking about the ESA program right now because it's relevant to people in Nashville. And as I've written recently, whether you agree with it or not, it's one of the more potentially transformative pieces of legislation that has gone through the state legislature in recent years. And it could radically change the way that education is done in the state. And I think it's compelling for that reason, given that the public school system has failed a lot of people. And in any event, that's all for our show. Again, if you're not signed up for our newsletter, get on the list, go to our website, sign up. There's a big button up at the top. You can click it. All right. Thanks so much.